All right, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Enough to Keep Going podcast. This is episode 324 for the week of January 28th in the year 2024, which I have now realized is the time when our robot masters will come back up in Mega Man 2 style. 20XX. But no, I think it is actually because I've been playing a bunch of retro games this week, and somehow they all keep pointing to the year 2024 and 2025 as where things go bad. But while things are not wonderful if you're a game developer this week, things are not that bad if you're a game player. So we've got plenty of games to talk about here on the Enough to Keep Going podcast. I am your host, DBQ Hams, and joining me tonight, look at that. It's Swissguard. Swiss is back with us tonight. Swiss, how are you doing, sir?
Not too bad, but we're like 8 months away from the Bell riots, right?
From Star Trek? Is that the
Star Trek DS9?
Mm-hmm. Yep. There we go. So yeah, well, wait a minute. 8 months. That's November. Well, we won't even go there, gentlemen. So, anyhow, also
end of August, early September.
Okay, we're not.
If you go back and watch the episode.
Those get referenced in a couple different times. You get that in Picard. You also get it in Strange New Worlds. There's a number of times where 2024 comes back to haunt us here. So, Game Logic. Hopefully, your technological setup there is not haunting you tonight. How are you doing, sir?
Good. We had a nit where when I started the OBS recording, for some reason it said the drive I was recording to couldn't be started or couldn't be reached.
Oh.
And I was like, well, I just used it like 10 minutes ago to record the intro and the outro. So, and then we were already live when that happened because I hit go live and then I hit record. So in the future, I may reverse that. So, because I was like, do I stop the live stream or do I go ahead and go live and then figure out how to record midstream? So, yeah, we're all good.
Well, thank you for your work there, sir. All right, gentlemen, I don't know that we have a whole lot of new games that we're playing. Swiss, I know it's the first time back since the holiday episode in our superlative show. But it doesn't look like you have too much new playing either here. So since I was not here last week, I was moving a kid back into college for the second semester. So thanks, Tao and Game Logic, for covering as I was out. I did get a chance to listen to your Pal World discussion, and it's exactly what I expected from Tao's description, right? It certainly is more Arc than Pokemon. Which is also why I have not been playing a lot of it, because it's more Arc than Pokemon. But Game Logic, you talked about playing some Prince of Persia, the new Prince of Persia that came out a few weeks ago. I had a chance to play the demo on Xbox on a 4K, and I will agree with your estimation. It looks really nice. That art style really holds up well in a 4K high def aspect, even if you are playing it on Switch. So,
and we had the nice Power World discussion here. There was somewhere else where somebody felt that my discussion about Power World wasn't that great because I predicted that this was a fad and a trend, and in 6 months, so unfortunately, we would be talking about this game like we talk about Knockout City. But some people felt that I was hating on the game, and I was like, well, A game is an inanimate object. It's not really
That's right.
feasible to really hate it.
It's a market assessment, and I think that that was an interesting discussion of Tao's estimation of how long it might hold out if there's enough of an audience there. It will be interesting, and it's a challenge in terms of launching a game, having it find an audience, having it be sustainable when there's so many other things that are up and running already and competing for our mind share. That's a theme I'm going to come back to at the end of this episode because I've been saving a soapbox. So, all right. But I have had a chance to play a little bit of 2 weeks ago now. Forza Motorsport Update 4 came out this week. They gave a preview for Update 5 coming out in a few weeks. But Update 4 had some additional cars, some more Lamborghinis, a few other tracks, added in Daytona and a couple other NASCAR tracks as well, which was kind of fun because it's been a while since I've played a NASCAR aspect of Forza. Back in Forza 6, there was a DLC that was all NASCAR related. Not that I'm a big NASCAR fan, but there's a I would not call it simplicity of going around a NASCAR track, but there is a Zen-like quality of that is different than traveling around something that is more of a F1 city tight turn track. So had a little bit of fun with that coming back in. They're still working on things like car progression and things like that. But as somebody who is playing it casually, it's enjoyable to jump in and out of as we go, or as I go at least. But this week, Microsoft has been in the news more, not so much for the Forza update, but for its announcement of multiple layoffs across all of its branches in terms of both in Microsoft and in Activision Blizzard. That we've got about 1,900 layoffs that are coming, about 9% of its gaming employees. We also have the departure of Mike Ibarra from Blizzard as the president. We've talked about Mikey Ibarra before in terms of his role and his kind of taking on leadership after other changes in Activision and Blizzard over the past few years with a variety of lawsuits and harassments and other types of claims. So that seems to be the big story here that I pulled out this week in terms of even after spending $68 billion on the acquisition. And I would say that this is not only have we been talking about game industry layoffs over the last year, but also in any type of acquisition, these types of layoffs tend to happen, right? How much of this is consolidation? How much of this is trimming off certain things? We get the announcement that Activision or that Blizzard is stopping the development on a survival game to shift resources. So that seems to be. Any thoughts here? Game Logic, I know that I'm going to guess that you have some thoughts on this one.
Yeah, and I mean, they're kind of all over the place. I guess maybe I'll start with just how it's kind of a bad look. Literally, and of course, the market is always kind of fluctuating. And actually, Microsoft crested $3 trillion a week and a half ago, maybe a couple of weeks. But they had dipped. I think they had dipped just below 3 trillion, and then the very day that they announced all these layoffs, they popped back above 3 trillion, and so that news came out like in the same day, concurrently with these layoffs. So these layoffs are going on as it stands right now amongst American companies. And in fact, yeah, it's showing here that like within the last day or two, they just swapped places with Apple again. So amongst American companies, Microsoft number 1, Apple number 2, Alphabet / who most people refer to as Google, is in at number 3, because I'm just counting American companies, so I'm not counting Saudi Aramco. Amazon in at number 4. NVIDIA, which entered the $1 trillion club last year, is now in at number 5 amongst U.S. companies. Meta right below them. Expanding a little bit beyond just U.S. companies. Just talking about tech companies. You've got TSMC up there in the top 10 worldwide. and Tesla in at number 11, Broadcom right below them. So, again, you just as you mentioned, right? You have the $70 billion deal close. You have them now the most highly valuated company in the world, and they're laying off 1,900 people. Now, as there's been a mixture of conversation, I would say, around the acquisition over the last couple of years. A lot of it has been just, quite frankly, insane and completely ludicrous, not founded in any sort of fact. In fact, there was a developer who got laid off during this time who talked about how, I talked a lot in the lead up to the acquisition about how Microsoft had emphasized ESG effects. And so these are environmental, I forget what the S stands for, and governance. So these are all like, by the way, oh, happy times, good knock-on effects that will supposedly come out of acquisitions. And Microsoft's not guilty of this. Every corporation is. And the FTC and actually most judges you will hear and other people around legal circuits will often say, like, don't tell me like the good happy times that everybody's going to reap from, right, these things. Is this good for customers or consumers or not? But corporations always stack up these knock-on good effects that will happen. And one of the things that Microsoft heavily traded on during the acquisition hearings was how this was going to be good for employees. Whether they did it in the courtroom or outside in PR, there was always this theme about how poorly employees were treated underneath the Activision regime and how everything was going to be better for them within Microsoft. And I often commented, you might want to kind of slow your roll on that. Number one, let's look at all these reports of all the bad things that are happening in Microsoft, the Undying Labs people, the things that are happening at 343 Studios, the Microsoft exec who's very high up in the ranks, who had years of accusations of sexual harassment, who finally got bounced right in the same time frame. I'm like, let's not think it's all roses and Tiffany couplings. Like there's other things going on here. And I mentioned that the normal part of an acquisition cycle is that almost immediately after an acquisition, there will be a significant chunk of layoffs based around the redundancies that inevitably come out of a merger. In this case, however, the layoffs that we're seeing are actually a little bit larger than the norm. More people being slashed than we would expect. And then you think about, again, we go back to how this acquisition is good for gamers, right? People who were slashed are like Sledgehammer Studios, like taking a significant hit. The people who just put out what, quite frankly, despite what a lot of media pundits were saying in their reviews and in their takes on Call of Duty Modern Warfare 3, is actually performing commercially amazingly well. And so this is a team who, had to encounter adversity and were given less than their normal time and turnaround time to get a new version of Call of Duty out. Were forced to do it within the code base of Modern Warfare 2, which is Infinity Ward's. It still pulled through all that adversity to make, quite frankly, what is now, right, in classic nickelbacking turnaround, right, is quite frankly one of the better Call of Duties in terms of competitive multiplayer over the last few years. Toys for Bob taking a huge hit, right? And the travesty of that is Toys for Bob, arguably a studio that should have never been converted to Call of Duty. It's kind of comical when you hear that Toys for Bob is now a Call of Duty studio.
Right. Your Skylander studio.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so I think one of the most tragic things, so at any rate, just to loop back, Microsoft kind of traded heavily on that theme of how things were going to be better for employees. Lots of fans who argued in support of the merger also said, oh, this is going to be great for employees. They're going to be treated so much better. Microsoft is pro-union. I often go on and on and on about how, look, pro-union, people who are pro-union, workers who are pro-union, are often about workers who are disenfranchised, who don't have competitive pay, who don't have competitive benefits. When people who campaign on this thing need to understand highly paid technical workers, like your people with hands on keyboard doing development, are not interested in unionization because it actually over lifetime dampens their total payout that's feasible. because what unions do is through collective bargaining, they target the median. And so your people who are super high performers and your people who have the highest earning potential actually get negatively impacted by unionization. That's a huge chunk of your people who are in gaming, who are hands on keyboard writing code. Your artists, your QA testers, people who don't get competitive salaries in comparison to those people, because we lump all those people in the same kind of labor category for whatever reason in the gaming discussion. Like, yes, those people are going to be pro union, but like these bands of like highly paid troubleshooters and sharpshooters who, you know, don't work for companies but are kind of called in the last 2 years, right, to work on a project and take it, like, those people are not interested in unionization because they're going to be negatively impacted. So at any rate, I think the last thing I'll mention is, you know, probably one of the most tragic things that occurred out of this layoff, and just to say, look, so my point is this layoff was coming. It should have been known that it was coming. That's not to say that, you know, it's not a big deal for the people negatively impacted, but the people who, again, said that, you know, it was roses and Tiffany cufflinks and it was off to the races and you were going to get this big unionization, you know, oh my God, look at Blizzard, 300 people unionized. Those people are all QA testers. Like, you know, so, but the people who really got caught in it is the people who were trapped in the perfect storm. And it's kind of super interesting how this unfolded. In the perfect storm of the Blizzard, everybody get back to the office policy and this merger. And those things converged in situations where people were responding to the Blizzard get back to work policy. And as the merger went down, bought houses, moved, packed everything up to get out to California, and then shortly after arrival are now being told they're no longer Microsoft, Activision, Blizzard employees. That's a problem. If those people are able to transition out into the gaming industry, back into the gaming industry in that kind of hotbed of employment, then maybe that's okay. But a lot of those people are going to have to transition to other jobs within tech, and those jobs aren't necessarily going to be out there. Some of those jobs are going to be back here on the East Coast. So, you know, and the likelihood of them transitioning back out into a gaming job, in the month of January, 3 weeks into the month of January, in fact, we have already slashed 5,000 jobs out of the gaming industry. That is 50%. That is halfway towards all the jobs that we slashed in the entirety of 2023. So what's the likelihood in January, right, when the industry and the market is kind of in a lull, right, that those people are going to be able to transition back and find new jobs in the gaming industry?
No, I think that's a really good point, right? Because it's not going to be any hiring happening before we hit the end of the quarter, right? Like, there is going to be trimming before we get to the end of March to try to make numbers for earnings reports as we head into the end of the fiscal year. And I mean, that's a really good point in terms of the transition and the movement of people for a job that did not exist for very long. I think, 2 years ago, that was a story when Telltale was hiring up people and then suddenly shuttered their doors, as well as that people were moving without any knowledge of this pending change. I think it is, while it's not surprising that it's coming, I think the volume that you're talking about is really the surprising part. And I think the other piece here, going back to the language around the merger, which I think is something that some segments of the gaming media kind of leaned on during the potential of the merger, is Microsoft's ability to open up creativity, to not have everybody be a Call of Duty workhouse and give them a chance to go out and explore things. But at the same time, when you have, you know, as you said, Toys for Bob laying off 40% of their people, that makes the potential of kind of new development a whole lot more difficult, or not even really possible, right? Like, what do? You're not staffing up because you're going to start something new. You're slashing to such a degree that there's not even the capacity to start something new. And potentially you could make the case that, yes, because of the network of studios, Microsoft has this ability to kind of farm things out. But we've also seen over the last 5 years how slow that process is, and how, that there's not necessarily a successful model of that kind of studio collaboration across multiple Microsoft studios.
It's not Ubisoft. Like Ubisoft, I mean, say what you will about Ubisoft, but Ubisoft figured this out a decade ago. They put an entire system in place within their HR, within their talent organization, so that if somebody was in a lull in Red Storm in South Carolina, North Carolina, whichever they are, and that Ubisoft Montreal needed a person with that skill set, that they created a network whereby that person could reach out and be tapped and be assigned to that project in Ubisoft Montreal. So notice that Ubisoft, as far as I could tell, didn't miss much of a drumbeat, right, because of COVID, because they had already wired themselves up like that. So yeah, but like you said, like it's been incredible. I mean, nobody showed up to help out Arcane Austin. Nobody showed up to help out 343. Like it's really weird. Nobody showed up to help out Turn 10. It's really, 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 really super weird to me that like the company that's responsible for Visual Basic, .NET, Microsoft Teams, like has not been able to figure out how to remotely network developers across the corporation in a similar fashion so that they can help people out. Like it's just really weird.
Yeah, it is disappointing in terms of the potential and the capacity for that potential. I think the other thing that will be an interesting kind of knock-on effect is as you were talking about with Sledgehammer and Call of Duty, like this is an ongoing game at least until November when there's a new one coming, or October in theory. But when you're pulling back on a studio that's sustaining development for a live service game, what does that do? Where else are those, how much are you leaning on Raven and some of your other Call of Duty factories to continue to help support that? And I also wondered, like down the road, and maybe this is the inevitable, and you've seen some stories around this for multiple years at this point, right? Like the change of Call of Duty from an annual boxed piece. But if you're pulling back studio support, if you're trimming studio staff, how is that kind of annual churn possible? So, and that's not necessarily a question that has an answer to it yet, but it'll be something that is definitely got to be on a board somewhere as they're talking about what do we do, and what does this look like in terms of staffing levels?
Well, and all those studios were impacted, right? So you talk about the contingency or the fallback of leading on Raven. I mean, Raven was slashed. The other thing is all of these studios are assist studios for the other studio when they're primary. So Sledgehammer helps out with the multiplayer when Infinity Ward is in the hopper. Like they're not off, So it's just, and Raven, I mean, lots of these Activision studios, as Activision was struggling with its own things in the 2 years, was doing things like, converting some employees to full-time, but also laying ones off. So Raven just in 2021 experienced a chunk of layoffs in their QA department. So, it's going to be weird to see where they go from here, and just weird to see how they get the next Call of Duty out of the door, because overall across the board, they're lowered. Now, one of the other things that I'll say is, it wouldn't necessarily surprise me that, I mean, so here you are, you're part of the production pipeline that is the cash cow of Activision. It wouldn't surprise me that the studios had gotten fat over the last few years, right? You're making all the money, recs are getting opened, you're a manager in position to ask for more people and probably not to be told no, right? So I could see how people were probably overstaffed and maybe not as lean as some people might think they should be. The last thing that I'll mention is the other thing that this may be wrapped around is, so remember, Microsoft has promised now, and this is a thing that I mentioned right during the acquisition while everybody was cheering for it. Microsoft, just talking about math, Microsoft has now promised to deploy Call of Duty to more platforms than it is currently on today. That does not happen with zero extra staff, right? So that also does not happen by making the entire development surface area more complex, right? The game deploys to certain platforms now. It's now going to the cloud, right? And it's now going to some Nintendo platform. That's a minimum of +2 in terms of overall complexity. It wouldn't necessarily surprise me that that a lot of these people were unfortunately trimmed because the skill sets needed to put this game on Nintendo and to push this game to the cloud is a different mix of skill sets than they currently have in the studio, and some wedge needed to make way for the additional staff that they're going to have to convert to and on board. And so this is one of those situations where you could see more people, right? You could see people getting hired right back to those studios that are a different skill set, right? You could see tons of DevOps people being hired right at Raven because now they have to support the game in the cloud. You could see people who have a different technical background being hired at Toys for Bob and at Sledgehammer because they're going to be part of a cadre that needs to put the game on Switch, which runs on an ARM processor, which isn't necessarily the same native skill sets as you have as people who are trying to put this game on an x86 platform. So, you know, be interested to see how it turns out over the next few years.
Yeah, I think that's as you said, right? We're not done with studio layoffs as well. So I'm sure we'll be coming back to this and what this means for the landscape of 2024. Swiss, any thoughts here before we move on to the next news story?
Yeah, I was, my thoughts, my first thought was every time I hear about one of these studios having a layoff, in the past I would think, well, the gaming dev community would, people would network and usually folks would land on their feet. But I kind of, my thoughts mirrored Game Logic's, where it's like there's fewer and fewer chairs. There's fewer open slots. So it's getting difficult. As far as but also the redundancies, there's 10% of their gaming division isn't HR, that's having to do stuff. So as far as you're cutting into core creative roles. Microsoft didn't acquire them in order to empower them to have a flourish their creativity. They were buying the IPs. So I have a little bit of a cynical view on the glass half full of the acquisition. Like you said, that Call of Duty's a moneymaker, and they're expanding the footprint, the platform footprint. So it's not, I don't want to say it's not terribly surprising. It's just, it feels very corporate.
Yeah, I think that's a very honest response, right? It is not surprising, but it is not necessarily good either. But yes, very, very corporate in that aspect.
And just just one thing. Just to tail on to what Swiss is so interesting. So just a reminder too that last year, again, in vast contrast in the past, right? I think in the past, Swiss, there have been times when they've been able to network or reach out to a friend or find, but like last year, quotes were coming out right about how difficult it has been for game devs to find new jobs in the game industry. People have been laid off. They have been out of work for 18 months or longer. There have been discords that have popped up in an effort to network and help game devs find additional jobs because it has been so vastly difficult and more difficult than it has been in the past few years for them to recover after what might have arguably been an overhiring in the pandemic. But it hasn't been the norm that it's usually been for them, in order to chart those same paths back to finding another job in the game industry.
And you got this, you talked about the perfect storm. You got this also with the whole AI, art and being able to, it's a force multiplier. That's what's great. That's what's useful about AI, right? But that there's going to be a realignment. So
yeah, it's a very good point as well, Swiss. All right, we've kind of teased some of the other places where we're going to go with some news stories here. We've got news stories related to some more Microsoft, Apple, and Ubisoft. So, Game Logic, why don't you take us through the next three here?
Yeah, so the first story over on Tryhard Guides, UK internet and phone customers unknowingly charged for Xbox Game Pass. Some British telecom customers in the UK have been unknowingly signed up for and charged for Xbox Game Pass Ultimate, leading to unauthorized charges on their internet and phone bills. The extra £10 monthly subscription fee appeared for these customers despite them never requesting the gaming service. Please check your own bill if you live in the UK, since this is an ongoing issue. Now, despite the headline, this was not added in the rundown because it's an Xbox bad news story. This is a bit of consumer advocacy to, in this day, and especially in this day and age where so many things are subscription based, to periodically check your bills and make sure that you're not being charged for extra stuff that you didn't ask for. I don't think this was anything shady. It's kind of funny in some ways that it's British Telecom, when one of the hardest places for the acquisition to get through was in the UK. So one might think that this was malicious in an effort to stick it to people because the CMA gave them such a hard time. I don't think that's at all what it is. I also don't think it was an effort to kind of sneaker net these people. Actually, the main reason I thought the story was interesting was because in the EU, I think in the EU, and maybe in the UK too, there was a policy enacted last year, and it was one of the reasons why there was a big slough off of Game Pass subscriber numbers, where there was a new law put in place that said, hey, if you see, you tech companies, you have the telemetry to be able to tell how much people are using their subscription service. It is on you that if you see a person lapse in their utilization of a service for X period of time, to warn them and then to close their service down. You can't just charge people in perpetuity when you have the telemetry to know that they're not actively using it. And so what the story says is that a lot of these complaints go back as far as October 2023. And so I'll have to go back and look at what that time period is where the companies are supposed to take action. But like I said, last year, Xbox had to cut a bunch of subscriptions for Gold and Game Pass because there were people who weren't actively using them, and so there was a correction in numbers. So and the other reason I picked up on this is because we talk on the show a lot about kind of the convergence of different things going on in the gaming industry as well as with other tech industries, and I know T-Mobile was doing a correction for people who were subscribers to the Netflix service. And so if you were subscribed to T-Mobile at a certain tier, they were automatically flipping you to, I think, to a higher level ad-supported service, whether you asked for it or not. So again, in this day and age where your cell phone bill incorporates subscriptions to other services, including what could potentially be, in this case, gaming services, just a reminder for you to go back and periodically check those things.
Yeah. That is a good point. Yeah, that is something that is pretty easy, and that amount of, I think the telemetry piece there is a really interesting, like for all those lapsed, subscriptions to random signups online that are still being pulled out of a bank account. There is the ability for companies to be consumer friendly in that versus company central or profit central. Before we move on to the next story, I just want to give a shout out to Borbor. Thanks for being here. Hopefully we'll keep you engaged and entertained. So next one, let's stay over across the pond here. And we've got a little update or a little new wrinkle in the Apple and Epic back and forth.
Yeah, and as always, I love Tim Sweeney's take on these things. This story on GameIndustry.biz, Apple to allow alternative app stores in Europe. Tim Sweeney calls the new policy a devious new instance of malicious compliance. I've got to use that one, malicious compliance. As Epic plans to launch Epic Game Store for iOS and return Fortnite to the platform. Beyond its new policy allowing game streaming apps worldwide, Apple today announced new changes it is making to comply with the European Union's Digital Markets Act, most notably that it will allow alternative app payments in app stores. So if you've paid attention for the last year, Apple has been doing a lot of things that on the surface appear egalitarian and friendly towards a lot of its policies that in the past, particularly around the App Store, that have seemed draconian, which is supposedly eventually allowing the ability for you to install apps on your iPhone that come from other places besides the App Store. In this instance, allowing one of the things that Apple has been notorious about, which is not only must you process payments through the App Store, thereby giving us our 30%, but you can't even advertise and tell your people, and this is one of the things that caused the big rift between Apple and Epic, you can't even tell people that there's an alternative method, right? You can't post on the screen and tell people, hey, by the way, you could buy your V-Bucks here, or you could just go directly to the Epic Game Store app and buy your V-Bucks there, and thereby pay us directly. You couldn't, subvert or covertly undermine the effort by Apple to get its 30%. They are supposedly being a little more relaxing about that. Of course, the interesting thing here, and GameIndustry.biz does a great job. A lot of these details seem very surface, and I wonder at the mechanics of them. But apparently they're opening this up, but then they're still charging the companies, to allow them to do that. So it claims, it indicates here, while Apple is also opening up the platform for alternative payment processing in the U.S., it is taking a 27% commission on such transactions. So I'm like, how is Apple taking percent commission on a transaction occurring off their platform? So although, Sony has effectively been able to do that by having a policy in place that establishes revenue parity, right, for players who play cross-platform with its games. When the metrics turn out that a player who would have played on PlayStation is spending money on another platform. And so maybe that's, but I'm really curious to see, I want to know exactly how Apple is enforcing this. In the PlayStation case, they require companies to sign up to giving PlayStation access to their financial records, and for those financial records to be audited when PlayStation chooses so, to make sure that people are being on the up and up. Additionally, the new terms will say,
is it like self-reporting, like on your taxes, that you bought something in another state?
Yeah, or like your what is that? What is the customs form that you fill in when you come back from another
declaring in customs?
Yes. Yeah. So they also indicates here Apple will take a commission of up to 17% on transactions for digital goods and services. Apple is allowing developers to continue using their existing business terms or switch to new terms that allow alternative distribution and payment processing. Those terms will see Apple take a commission of up to 70% on transactions for digital goods and services, with the option to use the App Store's payment processing for an additional 3% fee. So, it's tough to make sure that I'm fully understanding this. It sounds like maybe they've lowered the percent take that they take for using stuff on their platform, and you can go off platform, but if you go off platform, then they charge you more, which it seems like EU would wrap their knuckles by using heavy-handed kind of mobster-like incentives to force people to continue using their platforms by making it more expensive to not. So, in some ways, there's a loosening of the reins of what Apple has done in the past, but there's definitely kind of some shady shenanigans going on in here in the exact way it's being affected, which leads you to the Tim Sweeney type comment that it's malicious compliance.
All right. One final story, and maybe this is we'll end on a high note here after all this downtrodden aspects of the game industry. Game Logic, there is a game that you have been pining for, enclosed alphas for, that actually is coming out in another month. And we
Star
have...
Citizen?
No. Come on, Swiss. Star Citizen. Why should it come out if people keep paying it money? That's just fine. But this game here, going back to Ubisoft and their ability to network their studios together, we have our final story here comes from Tech Raptor regarding Skull and Bones. Game Logic, take us through it.
Yeah, this will start positive, but by the time Swiss lays into it, it'll probably end negative. I also wouldn't say that I've been pining for it. I would say that I've been pushing back on the people who have the notion that the game's never coming out. This story over on Tech Raptor, Skull and Bones reveals endgame content and year one live service roadmap. Today, Ubisoft revealed what players can expect from the endgame of the upcoming pirate game Skull and Bones on top of the roadmap for live service seasons during the first year. The endgame appears to be centered on creating your own pirate empire by taking control of the local industry to flood the contraband routes with goods. On top of that, you can control the route themselves. So, long story short, it looks like they're kind of aligning the seasonal content to what is a good standard rubric of, quarterly. They have 4 kind of seasonal tent poles here laid out over the year, and they essentially look a lot like, it reminds me a lot of kind of Sid Meier's Pirates, in that, it basically they're going to have like a big bad, each quarter that is essentially a kingpin of the high seas. And each quarter, you're going to be responsible for taking that person down, and that they're going to vary, what powers that person has, what resources they have at their disposal, the makeup of their fleet, what perks they have that benefit their forces, etc. So it's pretty interesting in some ways. It's nice to see Ubisoft get out ahead of a new game coming out and put out its roadmap. I think they've learned that over time. Rainbow Six Siege was notorious for not always having a roadmap. The first Division was really notorious for not having a roadmap. But I guess the thing that caused me a little bit of concern, they've put out a roadmap for the Division 2, but they didn't really stick to it. But then, by the same token, the Division 2 is in year 5, and it is still getting new content. So that kind of may not have always been on schedule, but it is getting delivered. And we've talked on this show ad nauseum about the fact that Ubisoft has this penchant for delivering content to communities and games that have a following that you don't hear a lot about. In that, unless you went and checked, you would just assume that it was a dead game. But Riders Republic, The Crew 2. Lots of games that are kind of undersung in the Ubisoft panoply still get content, still get a lot of support, and they're really robust when you kind of pull the covers off of them and see all the ants running about in the hive. They're active communities with who are getting support and love from Ubisoft, and that might be why, despite Ubisoft's problems, it still has a loyal fan base. So it's good to see this roadmap being laid out. Now we'll have to see if they really stick by it.
So, any thoughts here before we move on?
Yeah. I'm eager to see how it goes once it launches. It's cool that we're like 2 weeks away, 2.5 weeks away now. I just remember back when it was announced. It was like E3 2017 or 18, right? Like that's how far back it was, and it was the same E3 that oh no, of course it escapes me. What was the other pirate game? That's like
Sea of Thieves.
Sea of Thieves. I'm sorry.
Yes.
And I remember thinking, Sea of Thieves. I'm like, oh man, Skull and Bones look really cool, and then Sea of Thieves kind of was announced like a day or two later, and thinking, wow, that was bad timing. And Sea of Thieves has been out and massive and very successful. So meanwhile, Skull and Bones has been in kind of development hell. So
yeah, Sea of Thieves was announced at E3 2017.
2017. Okay.
Yep.
And I guess it's good that like Ubisoft, like Game Logic said, that they're trying to get out ahead of it and show some. It's good that they're showing a level of commitment after all the delays. So I don't have too much negative to say. I'm kind of a wait and see. The first year or two that we were waiting on it, I was excited about it, but we'll see.
Yeah, it makes it pretty easy to slow down that excitement after 6 years of development and stops and start stories. So, all right, gentlemen, let's move into our games that we've been playing since we've been dipping back into things that have been in either our backlogs or things that we've been kind of continuing to engage with. Game Logic, during our news story, as we talked about Microsoft and Sledgehammer, you talked about how Modern Warfare 3 has been pretty successful in terms of in the gameplay department, and it looks like you've still been playing it. So you want to take us through some of your recent experiences?
Yeah, there's not a ton to report here other than I enjoy playing the game, so I keep grinding away at it. I'm definitely kind of in my using and leading on the hacks phase, meaning you know I kind of never previously went with the cheese, but now I'm totally into, hey, I need to level up my pistols, and so I'm gonna play shipment 24/7, right? And I don't really care about the hard point or the domination points, but I'm gonna do what I need to do to level up my pistols or my shotgun or whatever weapon class that is incredibly difficult to get anything done on unless you're playing on a really really tiny map where there's just a bajillion kills out. So yeah, so I've been having fun. New maps showing up. Rio showed up this season, which has been pretty fun. I think a lot of the maps. At the end of the day, I think again Sledgehammer getting knocks, but the Call of Duty franchise and definitely Modern Warfare, and I think in particular this season one probably I've laid out kind of what a live service games, particularly a PvP shooter, really needs to deliver on, right, and what it gets graded on. It's maps, it's LTEs, it's LTMs, and it's cosmetics. I'm not a super huge cosmetic guy. I mean, I get that they have to do it. LTEs and LTMs mean less to me. It's really maps, right? Is really kind of my S tier thing, and that I grade these games on. And we're going to talk a little bit about Halo Infinite, but good example is where Halo Infinite kind of struggled with that over the years until they really got Forge into place, and then really started to be able to deliver maps with a little more speed and frequency. Call of Duty delivers, and it's one of the things I also talked about during the acquisition. It's that quip from Microsoft of if Sony doesn't like us buying Call of Duty, they'll now have 10 years, right, to come up with an alternative. I'm like, but understand that one of the things that benefits Call of Duty is this treasure trove, this trunk of past content that they can leverage, where if maps is a thing that kind of drives player engagement and stick to itiveness of your community, the fact that you have like 20 years of maps that you could dive into at any one point and resurrect them and throw it out like it's a new map and create this big buzz of nostalgia that draws players back, then that's not something you just create right out of thin air for PlayStation. So, but as a player in the game, I super enjoy it. And I think and I love the synergy that exists between the Call of Duty franchise and Call of Duty Mobile, because I think I played the Rio map on Call of Duty Mobile first before I saw it pop up in season one of Call of Duty 3. And I always get amazed that you play Call of Duty Mobile, and then it's like almost the exact same map as the desktop version. So yeah, been having a good time. Borber says Tekken 8 is head and shoulders ahead of any fighting game released so far. It's amazing. So
I think that is some high praise, Bober. So, right, like after last year of Street Fighter 6 and Mortal Kombat 1, I'm just trying to remember the numbering of Mortal Kombat's reboot, right? Like some strong fighting games last year, and to say that Tekken is head and shoulders above, which is great. I'm glad you're enjoying it. That is one of the new games that came out, but we are not playing it. Swiss, I think we just heard Game Logic say that that Call of Duty is following the Mario Kart model of bringing mobile maps and tracks into their main game as Mario Kart has with their expansion passes. But that is enough of a segue to bring us from high def warfare into 16-bit warfare as Swiss is playing on the Switch. This is a game that Switch kind of teased back the last time he was on in some terms of something that he hoped to be playing in 2024. This is Advanced Wars, the Reboot Camp.
Yep. Yeah, I think this was the superlative show most likely to be playing. So, and I have been playing it. The, I'm enjoying it. I like I like the the tone. Like it's a nice it's a nice light game, um, and I like the pacing. So it's the type of game that I can play in bed before I go to sleep, and do a battle before I pass out. And so I've actually been making progress because I can do like a battle every night, and I like that. The what's interesting, you know, like Game Logic talking about delving in and like refreshing a map or something. So with the reboot camp, they used 3D models, like right for on the map. So the units are 3D when they do like when you attack and your little tanks are going after the recon unit or whatever. And they show them together. Those are 3D models, and I found myself actually thinking that that was a I don't want to say it's a bad choice, but it didn't pop as much. The models felt, I know they're cartoony, but they still felt a little bit plain.
Did you play the original back in the early 2000s in terms of
It was always on my
16-bit
radar, but I
pixel?
never got around it. But it was
Okay.
like it was sprite based, right?
Yes, it was definitely sprite based.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So and that's what I was thinking. I was like, man, I almost want to see this like with like an Arc System Works like like anime like that level of yeah, kind of keep that uh like it's okay to keep the 2D, but just like really like amp up the detail and like the anime style, because like the little cutscenes that they have when they do like the anime movies, that's well done, and it was kind of stark. um
So Swiss, do you mean so the game has it has one view when you're out at like the map, and then it has another view when you zoom into actual like combat. So are you talking about the style for both of those presentations,
well,
or
both of
just
those presentations utilize like 3D models. Like when you're in battle mode, you're in 3D models, but like the little cutscenes and the scenes between, and even I guess when you like do a super, like your CO does like their superpower, like it does like the like a nice anime cartoon animation. I kind of am curious of like if that was the direction that they went for the refresh, like just utilizing the hardware and actually having like um sticking with the 2D graphics, but just bringing it up, like Guilty Gear Strive or something, for if we're going to talk fighting games. But uh, I know that's like a trite comment on the game because it's just like about the graphics, but uh,
But the gameplay pretty much is consistent, right? I think
yeah,
it's mapped one for one in terms of kind of how the battles play out, how there's not a reworking of the AI in there. It really
as
is
far as
just
I'm aware.
that's what I have read about it as well.
The only like I am enjoying the battles. I am enjoying moving the units around. Again, the pacing's good. I don't feel like I'm having to grind moving units across the map before anything happens. So like all that is great. The only slight complaint I have about that is sometimes like they'll have like hidden units or something. So I feel like I have to choose between being careful and like ticking up my turn counter, and therefore maybe getting a lower ranking the first time I play before I kind of know the map. And then you can go back through and be like, okay, I know there's like a battleship hidden there, so if I do it this way I can do it fast, and then you get the S ranking. That'd be my only complaint about the battles. I
Well, and it
love
really is almost like a puzzle box because there's not any adaptive AI that happens. There's not any randomization of,
no, the units
again,
are
it's
all set.
based on a GBA game,
Yep.
so it is. Yep,
But all in all, it's good, and I'm looking forward to continuing to play it. It was just I'd be curious to see if they went in a different direction with like the graphical overhaul,
sure.
how it would affect the experience.
yeah,
Well, yeah,
I
go
do
ahead.
feel like it's very rock paper scissor-ish though. And it's I mean it's and maybe I'm just bad at the game, so maybe I'm just having a different experience. Like I feel like some of the matches I've felt are super grindy. Like have gotten down to, you know, a war of attrition in the north, right? And then in the south, it's all dependent on me, doing a tank rush, right, across the bottom of the map to try and get like one remaining unit like onto their base. and that just taking like an hour, of time. So yeah, I don't know. I mean, I enjoy the game. I like it, but I do feel like I've had a few matches. It's also super tutorial. I feel like it's super tutorial heavy in the outset. I mean, so much so that like it just takes an exorbitant amount of time, and I'm like, dude, just let me move the unit. Like, stop yapping at me. Like this scenario should not be taking like as much time as it takes. But
Wait a minute, Game Logic. Are you saying that a Nintendo game is over? There's too much dialogue, or that it's
I've
over handholdy?
it's
I've never experienced that before.
it's funny because I was playing Fire Emblem Engage and Advance Wars 1 and 2 reboot kind of in overlapping times, and for me, and it could be I just could be remembering it incorrectly, but I feel like Advance Wars 1 and 2 was like way more verbose than Fire Emblem Engage. And I'm like, you got it. It seems like these are both targeted at like the same demographic, but like it's just reflective of two different styles and approach to
I
onboarding.
don't know. They always ask you. They're like, "Do you need to be reminded about cruisers?" And then exactly, Borvor, exactly. Um, the but like were you always saying yes to that? Like when they're like, "Do you need to be reminded?" And then they go through the tutorial piece because like you can skip that. But I guess I'm always saying yes because I didn't play the first time and I just want to make sure I know. And it's like, oh, okay, I can land a helicopter on my cruiser. That's important to know. So I do have to go through it, but I've been
Yeah, I don't
tolerating
remember.
it.
I think I think, and I may not remember correctly. It seems like you were asked one kind of generic question at the beginning. Like I don't remember it asking me, every single time. But again, it's been a while since I played, so I might not remember correctly.
All right, so stay on the mic because we're gonna. While you may have some objections to the art style in Reboot Camp, I'm gonna guess that you're a little more satisfied with the art style in the Messenger.
Yeah, I'm kind of getting more comfortable as like playing, just being like, I'm just gonna be able to play the games that I play, and if it means I got to go back a few years and play something, I'm gonna do it.
So,
Uh,
are you? Wait. Before I go into this, are you early in the Messenger, or have you gotten to
early.
the?
I know there's some
Okay.
twist that's coming, so I have
Okay.
not hit that yet. I started it this week because I had the Switch in my bedroom and the kids switched out the cartridge and I didn't feel like going downstairs to find Advance Wars. And I was like, oh yeah, I bought the Messenger digital like when they were on sale. I'll just play that because I'm too lazy to go downstairs.
We've all
So
been there. It's okay.
but it was no, I don't think like I'm not one that's like super into the, oh, it's 8-bit and it's retro, and so like like that doesn't appeal to me in and of itself. But I was surprised that when the game started, how much like the nostalgia did kick in with the music and everything. They did a very good like I I I don't know, it did feel good. And I'm enjoying the dialogue. That was another pleasant surprise. I'm kind of going in pretty blind to the game, other than the fact that like UDB and Kairos have all been like super, big advocates for it. So yeah,
It's a great way to do it, though, right? Like
yeah,
when you can go in blind to a game that's multiple years old and still enjoy it fresh. That's wonderful.
but it's yeah, the dialogue, like that's the like the platforming it feels good, it feels right, and it reminds me of back in the day. But I do like the storytelling, that layer. Very very crisp dialogue, and humorous. So really liking it. I've gotten through like the first boss, and I'm in like the catacombs.
Nice. Yeah, there's a lot there. It's enjoyable. It's some really tight kind of Metroidvania platforming and some fluid movement. So I would expect that you will enjoy what you're playing. It's also one of those where I it, it it was hard to come back to for me, right? Because there is a flowness to some of that movement in combat that setting it down and coming back to it, I really had to kind of relearn things when I did come back to it months later. So, all right, I'm going to stick in that kind of retro area here. And one of the games that I have been playing is another one as I've been going back through some of the indie games from last year that I wanted to clear up and get a chance to spend some time with is Prison City. Prison City is done by mainly done by a developer Programmancer, a small studio individual who's done and works with Retroware. Yeah, Retroware in terms of publishing it, but it is a it looks like an 8-bit action game. It is on Steam. It's also on Switch, a couple other places. It looks like it reminded me of Power Blade for the NES. If you remember Power Blade, kind of a side-scrolling action with a boomerang. You have kind of a weapon that spins around with you as well. You've got some movement and some slides and grapples, and it is it is difficult even on the normal setting. Fortunately, there's an easy setting if you want to enjoy, but you still have to make the jump, still have to defeat the enemies. The bosses have kind of that classic 8-bit pattern recognition and can be pretty punishing. But I'm loving the art style. It is the kind of orange and greens and the kind of low color count in terms of its art style. It really kind of fits in with that kind of 1980s 8-bit action game. So Prison City has been a lot of fun to play with, and it is one of those where I also had played Moon Raider back this over break over January, December. That's another kind of callback to kind of the Revenge of Shinobi era, which is also incredibly difficult. So I think that what I appreciate in these kind of retro games is where they do give you that ability of some difficulty options, right? Like I have lived through I rented this for the weekend and it's Friday night and I am so frustrated with this game after an hour. Do I really spend my time banging my head into the wall because it's the only game I have for the weekend? Or in this day and age, that's not the case. We have plenty of other games to go to. So it's nice to be able to, for people that want that difficulty challenge, it is there. For people that want the kind of, as you were saying, Switch, right? That kind of that warm nostalgia feeling, and bringing back to some of that gameplay. It's nice that there are some game options there. Programmancer is the studio also did a game that my son and I played a couple years back, Dumpy and Bumpy, which is a kind of a co-op puzzle game on Switch, which was a pretty fun game there as well. So I was surprised that it was coming out of the same studio. All right, back to you, Game Logic. In terms of, you gave us your update on Modern Warfare. You teased a little bit about Halo Infinite, so let's circle back around and find out where things stand with Halo Infinite and this final season before they change their model.
Oh man, you had to bring that up, didn't you?
Well, I wasn't here for that one, so I mean, you can stay there if you want, or you can just breeze on past it.
Yeah, I'm playing now because I mean, quite honestly, I mean, I'm going to say, we don't know what the future of Halo Infinite, is going to bring, and I'm sure that there are tons of fans who will say, Microsoft is going to stick by it and do this and do that, and as I continuously tell people, you need to understand that when you're talking to me, I'm somebody who lived through tablet PC, lived through the Zune, lived through Windows Phone. I'm watching now as Panos Panay has left Microsoft because, according to him, he didn't see the investment or the interest in pushing the boundaries of what the Surface line was going to do. It was just kind of drying up and going into this maintenance mode. And I mean, that's, so when I see these signals coming from Microsoft, I always, grab the seats of my chair, or as Swiss will remember from Star Trek the Motion Picture, during that era where the captain's chair had like the arms would like fold in to like be like this faux seatbelt. That's kind of what I always do, when I see these signals go on that, something may be getting sunsetted or there may not be as much effort going to it. But for the time being, I'm enjoying myself. I've got, I don't know, 15 levels or so, maybe less, 12 levels left on the season 5 battle pass. I've completed all of the operations, all of the events. I'm definitely playing enough now that like I mentioned, getting the Forge up kind of gave them this crop of maps that they could go out and obtain. When kind of their own map pipeline had kind of stalled, to go out and push in. And about mid-season, I also saw this inflection point hit that I actually liked. I really disliked over these past seasons how when they brought the new maps in, like that would become like the only maps that you saw in the rotation. Like any old maps, like so if you liked any of the old maps, then you would kind of go into these periods where like you would never see those old maps again.
I remember you talking about this before, that the rotation was weighted that way.
Yeah. So about mid-season, I started seeing a tilt where you would see that even out a little bit more, and they would kind of take the Call of Duty mobile approach, which I really like, which is just, that rotation is just all the maps seem to be like the percentage chance that you're going to get an old map or a new map is pretty evenly weighted. So you get this nice mix of, you get some Call of Duty Modern Warfare maps, and you see some Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2 maps, and you see some Black Ops Cold War maps, pretty evenly spread out. And you see a little bit more of that now in the rotation. I'm also, though, playing enough now where I'm definitely locking down on the maps that I really dislike, because they lend themselves to the cheesy tactics and the way people lock certain areas of the map down. But I've also am starting to see some maps that I really like and that I typically always do well on. Much more so. I was talking to Brapper earlier today, and I was like, I know those guys hated like Launchpad right from season 1. I never really like hated Launchpad. Like sometimes it wasn't a great map, again, because you would run up against some teams using really cheesy tactics. But other times, I would have a great time on Launchpad. But there's a handful of maps now. There's a couple that are like extremely vertical and just like aren't very horizontal, particularly where there are edges, more edges than maybe your typical map where you can fall off of. There are lots of maps where there's really small surfaces, right? Small edges where you can actually fall off of the map and get knocked out. But some of these maps, like the entire left and right side of the map, right, are an edge that you can be pushed off of. So, and there are more of those in this. It seems like in this season's rotation. So not too much a fan of those. But overall, I'm having a good time. It looks like one of the knits that I've had, which was the Yoroi armor from season 1, which is kind of the Shogun armor. That over the seasons, they haven't really had a lot of events or things that would allow you to get back to that armor and outfit it. So at season 3, I think they just gave you that armor core, which was nice, but they didn't. They haven't had a lot of ways for you to get back to all of the attachments. And so you would put the armor on and it would just be really plain. But I see things. There have been some things in either season passes or in the store where you could go through and fit the armor out. So, I've finally gotten some little bits and pieces and doodads to add onto that armor. But overall, I'm having a pretty good time. It'll be either sad or interesting or both to see where 343 goes from here. But I'm not keeping my hopes up with the way staff is being slashed, and it seems like we're coiling up for whatever this new generation and new future is going to be on the Xbox platform. But enjoy it while you can.
Yeah, I think it will be interesting to see what that support looks like as it goes forward, and what the capacity of that support is from that studio as well.
It may go away a little while, but like in this day and age, like the entertainment landscape, nostalgia infused IP is never going to be on the shelf for long. So
I agree with you, except I would say
all your examples with Microsoft were devices. They weren't like entertainment media.
No, but I would also say I've seen some really wackadoodle things with regards to IP. Like, look, I'm a person who has stuck with Halo Infinite for the vast majority of its time in service, but like lots of like there are Halo faithful who do not play Halo Infinite. They feel like lots of things in Halo Infinite break bread with the past history of Halo, and they still play the MCC. So, while yeah, I mean, and there were lots of things that were in the hopper that 343 was going to do with Halo Infinite. That fortunately didn't cut. That Staten coming back kind of reverse course on. That was going to send it in even a more divergent direction. So I just and now he's gone, right? and so I, and there's a leadership team in place that I don't necessarily know now understands all that nostalgia and that past of Halo. So I'm just not. I mean, I don't know. Like I said, it'll be interesting to see where it goes.
It could be labeled Halo, but it won't be Halo. That's what you're saying. Yeah.
Oh, gentlemen, I am so thankful for you both because you have teed me up nicely for my final game here in terms of not knowing the future and also the over reliance on existing IP and known worlds. So I picked up over the holiday sales at some point in time in December Immortals of Aveum from Ascendant Studios, the EA original, the UE5 game that I picked it up for $8. Which was pretty easy to say yes to. Ascendant Studios, if you remember, probably the last time we talked about them was back in September, where they laid off about 45% of its workforce. So we're just, cycling back through our stories here. But Immortals of Aveum it deserved better than it got. I am really enjoying this game, and I'm partly enjoying it because the combat is fun. It's more or less a first person shooter. I remember this you remember it from the sales pitch of you had 3 different colors of magic, which basically equated to a scout rifle, an automatic rifle, and a shotgun blast, right? Something that was single shot, longer range, not quite a sniper rifle, and something that was automatic, and something that was kind of high damage, low range. And each color, and they do kind of the Pokemon aspect of your Fire Emblem aspect of red, green, blue, that you've got, their enemies are weaker against certain types, or that they have shields that are made up of a certain element that needs to be broken down from that same magic type. There's, in addition to the first person shooter aspects, there's magic attacks and kind of world manipulation in kind of the magic that allows for different traversal. And it is wrapped in this big kind of story world, and it's got a lot of heart. As I've been playing it, I'm enjoying the gameplay. Graphics look pretty solid, right? I mean, you can tell it's got a little bit of Unreal Engine kind of plastic it's got that early Arkham City, Rocksteady, Arkham Asylum, where everything looks a little shinier than it should be because it's an early build of UE. But it looks really good. The world that it creates is beautiful to look at. I find myself exploring it. I found myself thinking that I haven't felt this way since like early Destiny, and not so much in the kind of combat, but this idea of exploring a world that's completely new and different, and that you don't know where things are, what's around every corner, right? I think that going back to that over reliance on existing IP, like there are, by building worlds around existing IP, there is a known vocabulary and visual vocabulary that you're interacting with. And so for me, this feels like I find myself comparing it with the early hours with Anthem, kind of find myself comparing it with Outriders, where
Maybe Halo Reach a little bit.
Not so much, because that's still it is that idea of a foreign world that is completely new, right? Where Halo Reach, you're still kind of, I mean, there's a little bit of exploration there, but it's still within the kind of landscape of planetary shooters. This is go ahead.
I was trying to give a bit of a nod to the notion that, but you had played all of this Halo right from a point in the timeline forward, and now you were going back, right, and you couldn't assume that everything was the same, right, as you were accustomed to.
No, that's a good comparison there. Yeah, you're right.
So did they emphasize the world building? Because I think what I remember about this one, wasn't this where like the CEO or something said that it was rough because they kind of released like the same week as Baldur's Gate 3. But I was, at the time I was like, but this is a first person shooter effectively, and that's an RPG. Like, you shouldn't really be in competition with each other other than, I guess, just having to deal with the zeitgeist. But
yeah, I think it came out a little before Baldur's Gate. Well, maybe right around late July, early August. I have to go back and look. There's a story. It's a little well, I shouldn't say a little. It's a lot of tongue in cheek. Like, Gina Torres she nails it. She's great in it, and the motion capture of her is excellent. You know, the dialogue is kind of cheeky action movie a little bit, but it's like it's earnest cheese. Like, it knows what it's like. It knows what it is, right? It's not trying to be self-serious. It's having a little fun with its dialogue, knowing, but not necessarily kind of people can fly outriders, F-bomb dropping dialogue for the sake of, pseudo edginess. So yeah, it isn't, there's a lot of things you can pick up around the world. There's a lot of codex that you can kind of dig through for world building, but there's not a huge amount. I mean, it's the characterization it's not even realistic to call it on a level of comparing it with Baldur's Gate, right? Like, it's still kind of it's an action game built around a magical world. Yeah.
So just clear up what Swiss was saying. So Immortals of Aveum was supposed to release July 20th ish. It delayed for about a month. Supposedly to give itself some more polish, but also maybe ostensibly to avoid, Baldur's Gate 3, which came out on August 3rd. And then the comment was that, no one expected Baldur's Gate 3 to kind of put the industry kind of in a chokehold the way it did, for just months.
Yeah.
And while I kind of agree, I mean, I think what we often talk about is when games are coming out, and whether or not a game needs to avoid another game that's in a different genre. It's a matter of what the potential overlap is, right, of that demographic. And I do think, despite the fact that it's a different genre, I do think that there's a chunk of people who, would gravitate towards Baldur's Gate 3, who also, right, would gravitate towards Immortals of Aveum. But regardless, I think at the end of the day, just Baldur's Gate 3 just sucked a lot of the air out of the room. I mean, pretty much entirely, really, until Call of Duty came out. I know Starfield got some good play, but I think it was definitely kind of encountering a lot of resistance, from Baldur's Gate 3.
Yeah, I think that's a very fair read on it. And I also, as much as I'm enjoying it, I also don't know that even if it had the month to itself, that it was going to set the world on fire, right? It feels different because it isn't, it's not churning through the same types of things that we've experienced, but it also isn't necessarily the best iteration of that as well. Like, there are places where the level design feels very much like last gen in terms of kind of corridors, and like, oh, if this corridor has branches, there's a hidden box at the end of it, right? Which is enjoyable, but it got me thinking about how this game, and this circles right back to our top news story, that Immortals of Aveum, or many of the other kind of games that have tried to launch a new IP, that the development time, the support, the challenge of what we've seen over the last few years of, I think this is relevant to talk about, is Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League is coming down the pipe as well, right? The challenge of trying to be the forever game, trying to be that live service game that you continue to come back to versus the kind of mode of PlayStation 3, 360, kind of you play through the story and you're done, right? And you move on to something else. That the development costs are high enough that there needs to be a long tail engagement in order to make back that money, where previously you could have kind of a standalone experience, maybe something that took a little risks in terms of going in a different direction, but it also didn't need to set the world on fire in order to make back its money. And that's not necessarily the case at this point in time in AAA studios, right? Like, as we're talking about the Messenger Prison City, yeah, you don't have to set the world on fire when you are a small indie dev with, with a small studio. But when you're a bigger studio attached to a larger publisher, there's a lot of potential expectation, or there's not necessarily the room to breathe or to fail and take another pass at it, right? We're not going to see a Immortals of Aveum 2, right? So I think that's where this is the soapbox I alluded to at the beginning of the show, is it brought me back to a time, I don't know, it wasn't necessarily a more innocent time, but it was maybe a simpler time, or a time where things were not things didn't need to have every hook into them in order to, I didn't need to know that I needed to come back to it week after week, season after season. And so it made me think about, the fun that Game Logic, you and Tao and I had playing through Anthem, or playing parts of Anthem, right? Like, there's good game design out there that kind of sits and stalls when game bets fail.
Well, here's your big litmus test. So, arguably, I can remember. I mean, this is a good indicator. I have a hard time remembering what this game is called. Immortals of Aveum comes out between Baldur's Gate 3 and Starfield, which maybe was a death sentence. By the same token, Titanfall 2 comes out between Battlefield and COD in, what was that,
2016?
16?
Maybe 17, but I think 16.
But Titanfall 2 also gets a ton of love, like after the fact. People recognize that it was a critical success that got crunched right by two commercial behemoths. What is your take on where does Immortals of Aveum fall in that comparison to what happened to Titanfall 2?
Well, I think, one, I'll say I'm not far enough through Immortals of Aveum to make that call after playing dozens of hours of multiplayer in Titanfall 2 and making my way through the story multiple times. Like, it's not going to be Titanfall 2, right? We're not going to look back on it and say, wow, it was doing some really revolutionary things that didn't get appreciated. Maybe there is the time factory level like Titanfall 2 has. There's some kind of hook. I doubt that. It is kind of fun popcorn action movie candy, right? Like, it's enjoyable, and it's allowing itself just to be that. So no, I don't think it isn't something that, I don't know that no matter where it would have launched, that it would have got a larger foothold than it did, except if it launched, I don't know, 3 years ago, 2 years ago, right? Something in a time where there wasn't as much out there, or that this generation was a little early, and that there might be, the glow up of graphics might have been a selling point, which is not necessarily what it was when it came out. It also had it had a struggling PC port at the time, it wasn't really optimized very well with UE5. So there were other issues here. I think it is to me it's a fun game. I'm glad I paid $8 for it. I also know, like, I don't know that I would have paid $60, $70 for it. Like, it is it's a double A game. It's a B tier type of game, which we don't necessarily we don't have many of those that that are polished, right? Like, we get some of those that kind of come out or get, from a small studio or from a side project, something that the Embracer Group is trying to just release quickly. But we don't kind of have that kind of mid-tier game to the same degree that we used to.
Yeah, it needed to come out in 2019 and gone up against Sekiro. I know you hate the way I pronounce that, Swiss. It needed to go up against Sekiro, Control, Death Stranding, Disco Elysium. Probably would have fared better and stood a little more shoulder to shoulder. I think unfortunately, the tale of 2023, and I know the entirety of people who talks about games, the greatest year in gaming ever, blah 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 blah. I think the real tale of the tape in 2023 is it's gonna go down as the year that a bunch of AAA big pocketed studios bellied up to the table and just, like, it was a mosh pit, and out of it there was one or two games that was going to come out as being the things that really everyone talked about. Baldur's Gate 3, Starfield comes out of it. Unfortunately, not because of Starfield's, like, critical landing on the market, right? But just because of all of the controversy, wailing and gnashing of teeth around Starfield and the commerciality of Starfield. But I mean, and Tears of the Kingdom, right? I mean, a couple of years hence, that's kind of, I think, all that people are really going to remember about 2023. And, a game like this, Forspoken had its thing, and now I see a lot of controversy about, was Forspoken really a bad game, or did it just, like, suffer, bad PR, or was it, it was a bad game at launch that got better, but by the time it got better, nobody had any time to pay any more attention to it. It'll be interesting to see. It'll be interesting to see, how that dynamic plays out, here this week with Suicide Squad, right? Is Suicide Squad a game? Gotham Knights, unfortunately, launches in holiday season, does well commercially, wound up, I think, 17th overall in U.S. sales.
Sounds about right. Like, it sold pretty well. Just critically was not, didn't review very well. Also was not necessarily what it was originally designed to be.
Yeah, so it'll be interesting to see if Suicide Squad, right, in a year out of that big traffic jam, that highway pileup that was 2023, if Suicide Squad will get a little bit more room, right, to breathe, to see how it improves. Because I don't know, I mean, we don't have a Tears of the Kingdom. I don't know that we have, I'm sure I'm forgetting all the release roadmap, but I don't know if we have something coming in late spring, in the roll up to kids getting out of school for the summer, that is really, again, gonna suck all the air out of the room. So I don't know, be an interesting dynamic this year.
Yeah, and we will be here to be talking about it. Swiss, any final thoughts before we head out for the night?
Always enjoy spending time with you, gentlemen. So thank you.
Yeah, I'm glad you could make it. Glad it worked out for you to be here. I think, as Game Logic said, there is plenty on the horizon, whether it's just over the ridge with Suicide Squad, Kill the Justice League, or things coming out this spring. There'll be plenty for us to talk about here on Enough to Keep Going. Game Logic, it looks like you're going to maybe play some Jagged Alliance.
That's the plan. That's what I'm planning on doing when we hop off of here. I'll mention also Glorious War, mentions in the chat. Hogwarts Legacy and Spider-Man 2 will also be talked about in future big sales hits. I feel like Mario Wonder came and went, but sold very well. Still selling not much online conversation. Yeah, I mean, we'll see. Glorious, I think those are good things that you bring up. Again, I'm forward projecting, right, and guessing, right, 2 years from now. I just wonder. I mean, Hogwarts Legacy sells really well, and that's what we talk about. I don't know that I hear a lot of people talking about much else, right? I mean, and other outside of most of the conversation that I hear about is about Potterheads who love Hogwarts Legacy because it renders like the Hogwarts universe.
Although, I mean, Tao's not here to take a counterpoint
To defend
that,
himself,
but
yeah.
like, right, like he's not a big Harry Potter fan, but he really invested in that game and really enjoyed the mechanics and the world exploration, and I think the fact that it, as you said, you don't get to the top of the charts for 2023 in terms of sales without having something that is that hooks people, or that gives the ability of word of mouth to continue throughout the second half of the year to continue to sell. So
I agree. I just don't know what it is.
yeah, that's fair.
That's the thing. And I mean, and none of that's, again, none of that's me hating on the game, right? That's my assessment, right, of the quantifiable and tangible data that I'm seeing. Spider-Man 2, I mean, is down there a little bit in the charts as far as sales go. What's going to be interesting about Spider-Man 2? Tons of people are having fun with it. It's going to be interesting to see how it fares in the DICE Awards. I think that's really what the tail of the tape is going to be, because it didn't, if I remember correctly, it didn't win anything at the TGAs. Again, the TGAs are an incredibly commercial vehicle, but my point being, the telegraphing from there was that there was a lot of Spider-Man fatigue, right, coming out of the media at DICE Awards amongst the development community. Completely opposite story, right? Tons of nominations. So it's going to be interesting to see what the thoughts are from the people who design video games, right? What their take is on Spider-Man 2. So it'll be interesting to see. But for me, yep, I'm planning on jumping off of here, going over to another PC, and picking up Jagged Alliance, because I saw it come across my windshield last year, but I didn't have time to get into it. I'm taking a window and some time to go back to 2023 to grab a couple things that I missed, and that was one of them.
Nice. Glorious War, I just want to thank you for joining, and the comments here, Borbor as well. Thank you for being here as always. I think Glorious War's comment on Mario Wonder, like, the Mario Wonder is one of those where 5 years down the road, we're going to look at it and go, it sold 30 million copies, right? It is one of those Nintendo evergreen ones that doesn't have to light the charts on fire, because it's going to be slow and steady over the next, assuming that a Switch 2 is backwards compatible, it's certainly going to continue to sell, as has been the case with other Mario games over the course of the Switch's life cycle. So, all right, Swiss, you got some Mech Warrior 5 here that you think you're going to dive into? Or is this, before we talk to you in another 3 months, you will have played some Mech Warrior 5?
I think that's probably accurate. I'm going to try to be back sooner than 3 months from now. But
well, good. It's always great to have you here. All right, gentlemen. So for myself, DBQ Hams, this has been Game Logic and Swisscar. This for episode 324 of the Enough to Keep Going podcast. We got a lot to go this year. We are just getting started here at the end of January, and we're going to see I'll be very curious to see what the news stories are, what the reviews start looking like around Suicide Squad, and how much of that is, as Game Logic was talking about the roadmap for Skull and Bones, we have the roadmap out there for Suicide Squad. So I'm sure it seems like we've got at least one news story up on the agenda for next week already with that release. All right, gentlemen. So until next week, thanks for being here. Thanks for joining in. Thanks for everybody who's been listening, watching, whether you're catching us live or picking us up down the way. Always glad to have you here and part of this community. So until next week, play the games you love those you play with, and be kind to yourself. Good night, everybody.